Welcome, listeners, to the Everlasting Stories podcast, presented by Semper Serpent Books in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm your host, Michael Strand. And I am excited to read to you the fourth entry in the News from Crate series by Nathaniel Hicklin, titled Beneath the Surface. On the previous episode, our hero, Wilma Dunn, saved her new friend Imogen by rushing her to a space-age doctor's office. And then they continued their tour and headed over to Chester's Boutique, where they met up with Dot and picked out a sweet new look for Wilma. Now that Wilma is all settled into town and that she's set with the council and even has an appropriate attire for the town of Crate, we'll really start to dig into what's going on here. In this episode, we're going to delve into Wilma's mysterious basement and find out what truly is happening beneath the surface. As always, the Everlasting Stories podcast is brought to you by our supporters over at patreon.com/sicksemperserpent. For $3 a month, you can have early access to this podcast, and for $1 a month, you can read the entire archive. That's almost 40 stories at this point, and more are being added all the time. So if you love progressive, fun, positive genre fiction such as mystery, sci-fi, fantasy, and steampunk, head on over there and check it out. All of our writers are local Minnesota artists, and this is their opportunity to create something truly unique and interesting, and we love sharing it with the world. We are in the process of expanding and promoting this podcast, so it would be so amazing if you stopped right now, went over to wherever you listen to this podcast and give us a 5-star rating and maybe a little review if you dig it. Or you can jump on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever, and share this episode. Chances are your friends will love it too. It's about time to start tonight's story. So this is The News from Crate, number 4, by Nathaniel Hicklin, Beneath the Surface. Following their discovery of the mysterious object at the clock tower, Wilma, Dot, and Imogen went straight back to Wilma's house to talk over what had just happened. Whatever it was something important and needed careful planning, and Wilma wanted to be on a couch to do that. "Okay," said Wilma, once the three of them were in her living room. "Imogen, what do you actually know about those keys?" "I know they were hanging there when I took the job at the library," said Imogen, cozied up on the couch next to Wilma. "The last person had some weird ideas about them, so I looked into the history of the town a little. All I could find were theories, and they're pretty much what I told you a minute ago when we ran into Dot at the tailor's shop." "All right," said Wilma. "Dot, you said that when you saw the key, you somehow just knew where it was supposed to go. Did you just know about any of the other keys?" "Nope," said Dot, reclined in an easy chair. "I don't know anything about the other keys. I just got a feeling about that one." "Maybe it was because she saw the clock tower when you arrived yesterday," said Imogen, "and she hasn't yet seen the other places where keys might go." "I guess that's possible," said Wilma. "Dot, You willing to test that? What, you just gonna parade me around town until I get another sudden key urge? Said Dot. I mean, yeah, it's worth a try, isn't it? Said Imogen. I've got one more question before we start, actually, said Wilma, and it's kind of an important one. She held the strange metal and glass globe in her hand, its weird, tiny geometric flower blooming and writhing in the center. Does anyone have any idea what this thing is? Not a clue, said Imogen. I mean, is that a trick question? Said Dot. I barely know what half the things in this town are. Well, we can definitely agree on that, said Wilma. I'm going to find some place to keep this thing, and then we can go looking for more keyholes. She went to a workroom and opened a closet. Inside the closet, Wilma found an ornately styled cube of metal, which filled most of the closet. On the front, an engraved plate read, "The Everlast Personal Storage Vault, courtesy of Vinnie's Vaults." Whoa, said Imogen. Your uncle had a sweet safe, said Dot. I hope he wrote down the combinations somewhere. Even if he did, said Wilma, there aren't any dials or anything. She felt around the front of the safe for any moving panels, but no part of the metal had any visible moving parts, just an engraved plate that pivoted on a concealed pin. Behind the plate, Wilma found a keyhole which matched her council membership key. Inserting her key caused the safe to split along artfully hidden seams, unfolding and refolding itself until it sat inside out in the closet doorway, revealing rows of wooden compartments. Ooh, secret treasure, said Dot. Anything in there? Wilma was already opening the compartments, but they were all empty, except for one. Inside, she found a small journal with a metal clasp. Wilma unhooked the clasp and flipped through a few pages. Wilma had seen a lot of the town's odder features over the past day, but Amos, it seemed, had seen them all and had written down every single one. Anything interesting? Said Imogen, standing on tiptoe and peeking into the book. It's hard to tell, said Wilma. Some of it is written in plain English, but a lot of it just looks like weird math. There's some engineering or something going on here, but most of it doesn't make any sense to me, and some of these pages, gosh, they seem to refer back to each other. Wilma stopped on one of the pages, looking closer at the writing. This one looks like it makes sense, though. She showed the page to Dot and Imogen. It was a map of the town spread over both pages, and a few of the locations were labeled with more precise descriptions. One of them said, "Back of Clock Tower." Wow, that should save us some time, said Imogen. The three of them spent the next 2 days traveling all over Crate, checking out each of the points of interest on Amos's map. Each location caused Dot to have another moment of clarity related to the keys in the game room at the library, and each time, Wilma and Imogen followed Dot back to the game room and then to the location with the new key, and once she used the key, Dot immediately came back to her senses. They unlocked 5 other compartments throughout town, each containing another bizarre object. Every time they found something, Wilma made a note in the journal of where they'd found it and added it to the growing collection in her uncle's safe. However, every item they discovered made it even harder to wrangle any sort of sense as to what they were for. One of the items looked like a vacuum tube with a weird socket at one end and a circular dial at the other. One was like a giant corkscrew with 3 separate handles. Another seemed to be made of metal foil and wire attached to a round base. When Wilma pushed the button on the bottom, the metal stood up and waved back and forth like a tiny little inflatable wavy-armed tube man from a used car lot. None of the items were described in the journal, only their locations. Wilma figured Uncle Amos must have found these keyholes all over town, but had no idea what they concealed. Once they had all the items they could find from Amos's map, they turned their attention to the rest of the journal. Wilma studied it from top to bottom, copying out as many pages as she could. She and Imogen spent long days and evenings arranging and rearranging the copied pages, trying to figure out how they all fit together. Dot joined them for the first day or two, but she left them to their theories once the adventures started to seem too much like homework. One evening at the Dunn house, Wilma and Imogen sat together on the sofa in the living room. Loose papers covered the coffee table. Crumpled attempts at a unifying theory lay strewn around the floor. They had already disproved their most promising theory from the night before, just like they had done every night so far. Every time they thought they were getting close, they found something that threw it all up into the air. The assorted excerpts from the journal did seem to be beginning to resonate with each other, though. Something was emerging from them, something approaching meaning. It seemed so close. If only they could keep their eyes open for another 15 minutes, they would surely have it. It was so late, though. Perhaps a couple minutes of shut-eye would be enough. When Wilma opened her eyes, the sun shone through the windows, their notes on the table neatly stacked, and the floor bare of wadded paper, and no sign of Imogen. Wilma checked her phone. It was well past 10 in the morning. Fortunately, she hadn't missed any calls or jobs from the council, but just in case, she sent a quick text to Imogen. "Sorry I fell asleep on you last night. Hope I didn't make you late for work." She then headed upstairs for a shower, but got a reply before reaching her room. "Can't recall who passed out first, honestly. Only missed a little time. Wasn't too bad," Imogen texted back. "Thanks for cleaning up before you left. Maybe I'll bring you a coffee?" Imogen just texted back a question mark. "All our stuff was tidy and the room was clear when I got up. Wasn't that you?" No, she texted in reply. Now Wilma was paying full attention. "Well, it wasn't me. So who else?" Just one of those things, I guess." Apparently, on their grand tour of Crate, Imogen hadn't seen fit to mention that messes just clean themselves up sometimes. This seemed like something that needed face-to-face discussion. "Well, I'll bring you over a coffee. See you soon," she texted. "Love it. Milk and 1 sugar. XO." Wilma stopped at Ben's Cafe for 2 coffees, one with a milk and sugar and one with 2 pumps of hazelnut, and then she made for the library. As Wilma approached the information desk, she saw Imogen seated at a keyboard and set down the coffee. Imogen spun around as she heard the cup being placed on the desk. "Oh, my God, I love you," she said, gushing as she picked up the cup and took a long pull. She took a deep breath to savor the aroma, and then she looked up. "Oh, Wilma, you're here too. I didn't see you there." Wilma scoffed at the fake slight, and then she leaned over the counter for a quick peck. "Yeah, it's good to see you too, what's your face? Somehow, you don't look like you've spent your night on a couch." "Yeah, there's actually a little shower back there," said Imogen, waving to a door at the back of the main room. "It's mainly for emergency chemical spills, but it'll do in a pinch." "Chemical spills?" said Wilma. "What do you keep back there?" "Oh, you know, I do a little document preservation here and there, and it uses some pretty nasty solvents." "Oh, okay." Wilma took a sip from her coffee. "So I wanted to talk about the mess we left last night. Crumpled papers and things left around the floor. You remember?" "Yeah," said Imogen. "Of course. What about it?" "Well, I told you that it was all gone when we woke up, and then you said that it was just one of those things." "Yeah, you get used to it." "No, so Crate doesn't have, like, a sanitation service or a garbage truck or anything like that?" "Nope. The cans and things just end up empty every night, as far as I can tell. That's way more convenient than having to haul bags around and sort things." "But where does the garbage go?" said Wilma. "Does it get burned, buried, stuffed into attics?" Imogen sat with her coffee and stared into Wilma's eyes. After a moment, she stared in a different direction. "Huh," said Imogen. "You know, I never really thought about it like that. But, of course, All the garbage would have to end up somewhere. It's just not something that people wonder about around here, I suppose. I mean, I grew up living in an apartment, so I was always used to throwing everything in a dumpster and then forgetting about it. You know, that actually raises another question, said Wilma. Does everyone in Crate move here from somewhere else, like you and me? Or are there people who are actually born here? Oh, yeah, sure, sometimes, said Imogen. I know Willa comes from here, and I think the couple who run the gym, they have a child. Willa, said Wilma. The nurse, said Imogen. You remember? She works with Dr. Nance. She wears that heavy teal biohazard suit most of the time. Oh, right, said Wilma. And the mention of the nurse brought up yet another question, but now is not the time for that. Anyway, I can look into that later. Right now, I need to find out about this garbage situation, so I'll let you get back to your work. See you later? Yeah, I'll text you, said Imogen. Thanks for the coffee. Imogen reached up to lovingly bat her finger against Wilma's cheek, and Wilma twitched her nose at her in response. She smiled and turned to leave as Imogen got back to her screen. So, not something people wonder about. That's what Imogen had said. Wilma stood at the top of the library steps, looking out over the town square, from the iron clock tower at one end to the town hall at the other. How many things in town did people just not wonder about? How many weird things were going on right under everyone's noses just because nobody bothered to wonder about them? She was obviously going to have to stop taking things for granted and start asking more questions because life in Crate was becoming too interesting not to start peeling back the layers. Well, first things first, where was all the garbage going? The best place to start looking would be whatever place threw away the most stuff. And she thought about the waste she had generated in an average day and what most of it was. And then she finished her coffee and headed back to Ben's cafe. The breakfast crowd was already starting to die down, and the lunch crowd hadn't yet started to pick up when Wilma stepped into the cafe. Most of the tables were still laden with dirty dishes, and she looked around the room, holding her empty coffee cup, and stepped up to the counter. Ben was nowhere to be seen. Before she could call out his name, the rear door swung open and Ben stepped out. "Oh, hi, Wilma," he said. "Ready for a refill on that coffee?" Hey, Ben, just a quick question," said Wilma. "If I just tossed this cup onto the floor, what would happen to it?" "Well, what would you want to do that for?" said Ben. "I'd rather people left their empties on the tables." "Oh, sure," said Wilma. "That's fine. I can do that." She walked over to the table and set the cup down. "And then what?" Ben tilted his head. "Then what? What happens to the cup after that?" "It'll get taken care of, along with the other dishes," said Ben, speaking slowly and cautiously, as though he were creeping up to a blind intersection. "Ah," said Wilma, "it'll get taken care of. And what exactly does that mean?" Ben looked back and forth inside his cafe, but whatever he was searching for, he didn't find it. "Look, Wilma, Look, how about you step in the back with me, just for a sec? Okay?" "Sure," she said. And then she followed Ben through the door, where there was a small table and a large collection of machinery that smelled like kitchen grease and citrus detergent. He took a seat at the table where a plate of quiche sat half-eaten, and he invited her to join him. "I hope you don't mind if I talk while I eat," he said, between bites. "But I have to sneak meals in between everyone else's. So, how about you tell me exactly what you're looking for?" "Look, I don't want to upset anyone," said Wilma. "I'm just trying to find out what happens to the garbage around here. It seems like you'd have to deal with a lot of it, with all these dirty dishes out there." Okay, said Ben. "If you really want to know about the dishes, I can help you with that. It usually happens while I'm back here, between shifts. But sometimes, when there are late stayers, it'll happen while I'm looking. And all that happens is the top surface of the table sinks down in the middle, and then all the dishes slide toward the dent. And then the whole top surface of the table sinks down into the base, or something, and another surface kind of grows into place, like frost forming on a window. I don't know what happens after that, but the cabinet under the counter out there always has clean dishes in it. So it's happening, like, right now? Said Wilma. Huh. It should be, said Ben. Wilma stood up and went back to the dining area, and sure enough, all the tables were clear and spotless, except for the one where she had set her coffee cup. With that one, the broad tabletop had become a wide bowl, like a wok, and all the dishes were piled at the very bottom. As she watched, a new surface grew in above the pile until the table looked brand new again. Ben was right. It did look like some kind of crystal, almost exactly like ice spreading through water. Wilma bent down to see the underside of the table. She hadn't appreciated how thick the tabletops were, but there was plenty of room in there for a meal's worth of dirty dishes. The stem of the table was fairly narrow, though. It definitely wasn't thick enough for a whole plate to pass through. She walked back to the rear door. What about spills, though? I'm sorry, said Ben. I can see how the tables take care of the dishes, but what if someone drops a glass or a piece of food? Don't you worry about pests? Ben's face broke into a smile. Oh, that one's easy. No one has to worry about pests and crate. We have Gus for that. Gus? Yeah, Gus Dorschmeyer, the pest control guy. He's on the council like you. I figured you'd have met him by now. Oh, the dude with the scar and the falcon. Yeah, that's him. Wilma recalled seeing Gus at her first council meeting. She honestly could not picture a guy who looked as though he fought wasteland marauders for water and bottle caps, laying down rat traps. Now that she thought about it, though, if he did, then those rats would not know what hit them. Do you know where I can find him? Not offhand, said Ben. But if he's counsel, then you should have an app that can help. Oh, that's right, said Wilma. Thanks for your help, Ben. She stepped out onto the sidewalk and pulled out her phone. The app that notified her about jobs did indeed have a function for locating other council members, and it pinged Gus's phone at a house just a few blocks away. When Wilma reached the house, she saw Gus standing in the street, his hands proudly on his hips as he oversaw a scene of carnage. A wasp nest was wedged in the upper corner of the front porch of the house, and a large bird stood with its claws latched onto a post, its head darting in and out of the side of the nest. With each jab, it poked a new hole in the papery nest and pulled out a wasp, scissoring them in half one by one and dropping the bodies on the deck. The bird had a prosthetic beak with a little racing stripe down the side. Gus spotted her out of the corner of his eye as she approached, but he didn't turn. "Good day, Miss Dunn." "Good day to you, Mr. Dorschmeyer," said Wilma. "That's not your normal bird, is it?" "No. I usually fly the gray falcon, but they prefer larger prey, like vole and hare. For wasp, I fly the European honey buzzard there." His voice stayed low and raspy, like Clint Eastwood after someone had keyed his car. "Do you know anything about the garbage collection?" said Wilma. "Is there anyone on the council who handles that?" "No, there's not. Garbage isn't a problem we've had in Crate." "Well, I found myself with a garbage-related problem. I left some around my living room last night, and it was gone by morning. I want to know what happened to it." "Garbage, by definition, is that which is no longer desired, Miss Dunn," growled Gus. "Why should it interest you what happens to the garbage?" "Well, it certainly isn't vanishing into thin air," said Wilma. "And, as you say, no one would desire it, so no one would steal it either, right?" Of course not." Gus turned back to his buzzard, which had stopped plucking wasps from the nest and begun taking the abdomens in its claws and removing the stingers with its beak. So, what if an animal is taking it? Maybe something is building a nest in my walls. Whatever the case, things are being removed from my home without my knowledge, and I would like to know how, why, and by what.
I don't use traps, said Gus. It's an immoral method of combating vermin. Natural predation or nothing.
So, what would you recommend for locating a hidden nest? Said Wilma. Some sort of tracker that the creature would find and take back with it? Gus gave her a thoughtful look, and his normally slitted eyes narrowed even further.
You might just be onto something there. I'll meet you at your house in 1 hour. Good day to you, Miss Dunn.
He turned back toward his bird, the conversation evidently over. Wilma turned away and headed back towards the square, eager to tell Imogen and Dot about the latest development. That evening, Imogen and Dot joined Wilma in her living room again for another session of pondering the mysteries of Crate. This time, though, they made sure to generate a truly impressive pile of wadded paper in order to disguise the one which concealed Gus's special mixture of aromatic and fluorescent chemicals. Wilma also positioned her phone so its camera pointed at the pile, with the footage being automatically uploaded to cloud storage so it didn't overflow her phone. For one last precaution, they deliberately picked a night for their project when Imogen could sleep in, since the library was open later than usual the following morning. As usual, Dot had lost interest once the math started to get complicated, and, as usual, Wilma and Imogen fell asleep on the couch, surrounded by their theories. The next morning, Wilma awoke with Imogen curled up in her lap, the floor clean again. The two got up, and Wilma found her phone to check the status of the recording. The upload was clean. She went to her computer and downloaded the footage. Most of it was an empty room, but skipping backward through the footage revealed the moment when the intruders arrived. The things looked like foot-long metallic centipedes with giant mandibles and glowing eyes. They crawled in single file out of a semicircular grating at the bottom of the wall, which Wilma had assumed was just an air vent. Each took a wad of paper in its jaws and crawled back towards the vent, one at a time. The last one chirped at the duct before escaping, and the duct's cover rotated back into place as though they had never been there. Uncle Amos hadn't mentioned anything like this in his journal. All of their theories were thrown out the window, yet again. Imogen was pressed against Wilma as they watched the footage, her knuckles in her mouth. Wilma shuddered to think of those things crawling through her house while she slept, but at least now she knew what was taking the garbage away. Now she needed to know where they went, so she dialed her phone.
This is Dorschmeyer, said Gus. What can I do for you, Miss Dunn?
They took the bait, said Wilma, and I have located the entry point. Can you follow the trail?
I have someone who can, said Gus. I'll be right there.
Gus arrived within 10 minutes with a ferret wrapped around his shoulders. The ferret wore a little utility vest, like a construction worker. Wilma wanted to reach out and scratch its tiny little ears until she saw its scarred right eye surrounded by a bald patch and filled with red light. The ferret looked at her with almost the same glare Gus always wore. Gus tapped his phone screen a few times.
Turn on your television,
he said. Wilma complied and found the screen filled with a view of her own face.
The ferret will follow the trail, said Gus, and we'll be able to see what he sees. I'll also be tracking his absolute position to generate a map of his path in 3 dimensions, showing us the XYZ location of the creature's nest.
Will he be able to open that grating? Said Wilma, pointing to where the centipedes had gone.
He was trained to help assemble passenger jets, said Gus. He can certainly handle a little vent cover.
Wilma and Imogen gave each other a look, and neither of them wanted to challenge Gus on the technical qualifications of his pet ferret. All right, Gus, said Wilma. "Let's get to it." Gus knelt down, and the ferret scrambled down his torso onto the floor and sniffed at the spot where the baited paper had sat. On the screen, the patch of tracking fluid glowed green against the muted colors of the rest of the image, indicating that he'd picked up the scent. The ferret looked around the room, and then he made a beeline for the vent, following a trail of green dots. When he reached the grating, the image on the screen zoomed in to the hinge at the top. Scanning lines swept across the image, and a numerical display began to spin through different sequences of digits until a single combination froze in place, and the grating swung aside. The ferret darted through the opening. The image on the screen changed from color to black and white as Gus switched the feed to infrared mode. The ferret continued following the trail of glowing green dots until the duct ended, giving way to a diverging tree of walkways. Metal centipedes crawled back and forth along the walkways, dropping pieces of garbage into various hoppers. Below the walkways, the ferret saw conveyors, chemical vats, and grinding drums that rendered garbage into shreds and wet slurry. A whole system of machinery processing the mess into who knew what.
"I believe that we have finally found what you are looking for, Miss Dunn," said Gus. "I don't know how much further this path leads, though, and I'm not going to let my ferret get into a situation that threatens his safety."
"Oh, sure. Well, that's all I need to see, Gus," said Wilma. "You can call him back. I don't believe I'll be needing his services any further today. Thank you." Gus tapped his phone again, and the image turned to face back the way it had come. "While he's on his way back," said Wilma, "can you show us at least a preliminary render of that 3D map?"
Certainly,"
said Gus. He tapped his phone, replacing the video image on the TV with a graphic of a green line that wove snake-like in a descending, zigzagging spiral across the screen. "If the top of the path is here, where we are," said Wilma, "then where does that put the bottom end?"
"Roughly 150 yards east of here," said Gus, "and several hundred yards down, which is, of course, only a rough estimate."
"Wow, that puts it almost directly beneath the town square," said Imogen. "Did you have any idea that there was a giant waste management plant about half a mile below the town?" asked Wilma.
"No," said Gus. "No, I did not."
"I didn't either," said Imogen. "I don't know about you, but I kind of want to know who put it there." "Well, I know a way we can go about finding that out," said Wilma. She walked down the hall to the rear of the house, motioning for the others to follow her. She opened a door, and she looked down the heavy metal stairs that Dot had found on their first day in town. "Is that your basement?" asked Imogen. "What do you have down there?" "Oh, it is no basement," said Wilma. "The stairs start spiraling down after about 15 feet, and I have no idea how far down they go."
"I imagine they go down at least several hundred yards, then," said Gus.
Imogen held Wilma's hand tight. She was starting to wonder things she had never wondered about before, and she wasn't sure what to do with that. Wilma raised her hand and kissed it gently, not taking her eyes off the staircase. "You know," said Imogen, "I don't think I'll be able to get into our little theorizing parties in quite the same way anymore." "Oh, I think we're way past that now," said Wilma. "I think it's time to start putting our theories to the test." All right, friends, that's tonight's story. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed reading and producing it. Once again, you heard The News from Crate by Nathaniel Hicklin, number 4, Beneath the Surface. If you enjoyed tonight's podcast, please consider jumping on social media and sharing it, or leaving us a review or comment. We really appreciate that sort of thing. If you want early access to new episodes of this podcast, simply head over to patreon.com/sicksemperserpent, and at the $3 a month level, you can get just that. And don't forget that for just $1 a month, you can read with your eyeballs the entire archive of short fiction by amazing Minnesota authors. The text and audio for tonight's story was produced by me, Michael Strand, managing editor at Semper Serpent. The author of tonight's story was Nathaniel Hicklin, Semper Serpent writer, and the publisher of tonight's podcast was T. Martin Krause, editor-in-chief at Semper Serpent. And finally, the music tonight is by the producer Lackey Inspired. Find more of his work at soundcloud.com/LackeyInspired. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have been, thanks for subscribing. We'll see you next time on the Everlasting Stories podcast.
Really take this feeling.